Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the January 22nd, 2020 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. First thing on our agenda is the consideration of minutes for the regular meeting of December 19th. Are there any corrections or changes to those minutes?
No, sir.
All right. If seeing none, we'll go ahead and accept those minutes as submitted, and we'll move on to new business. The one item of new business that we have on our agenda today is a special use permit request. It's application Z20-001 by Mr. Cloud Rantree of Huddleston Steel Engineering, representing Enterprise Holdings Incorporated, requesting a special use permit in order to establish a motor vehicle sales and rental facility on property in the Commercial Highway District located along the south side of Franklin Road east of Franklin Heights Drive. And I'll go ahead and let you review that application for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like you said, this application is for a special use permit. This area is zoned commercial highway. The subject parcel is roughly 5.11 acres and in size. Staff's primary concern for this application is to adequately buffer the residential areas from the subject parcel, and also to ensure gate locations are in a place to where they allow motorists to back out without having to back into the street, and as a safety feature. That's basically the gist of this application. I would defer to the Mr. Blomley for further discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. Wanted to add a few things to Mr. Ware's presentation. You'll recall back in, I think, 2017, the zoning ordinance was amended to allow motor vehicle sales uses only after the issuance of a special use permit in the commercial highway zone. So that's why they're bringing it to us today, because the property is zoned commercial highway, therefore a special use permit is required. And it is a sensitive site in that there are single-family residential uses along both the south and the west sides of the property. So our main concern is making sure that we mitigate any negative impacts on those two, adjacent to those two lot lines, adjacent to the single-family residential uses to the north and the west. Directly to the east of the subject property is what appears as a, if we could bring the aerial photo up, what appears as a vacant lot. Mr. Ware, if you could put that back to the, there we go. What appears to be a vacant lot, there's a proposed racetrack gas station that's moving forward on that property, as well as the extension of a public right-of-way, which would be the extension of Gresham Lane south of Highway 96. So this property will actually have frontage on both Franklin Road and on the new public street, which will be the extension of Gresham Lane back to the south. So the proposed development would have access to a signalized intersection at the Gresham Lane intersection. The applicants are proposing a type E buffer along the south and west property lines to buffer the adjacent residential uses, as well as a 6-foot-tall privacy fence. And that privacy fence would not be intended to supplement any of the required plantings in a type E buffer, but it would be to be in addition to those required plantings. The type E buffer is actually required by ordinance, and it's our most stringent type of landscape buffer, our widest and most densely planted. One thing that I wanted to point out is we received a revised site plan at 11 a.m. this morning, which did not give us adequate time to review the revised site plan. Therefore, we as staff would recommend that the board, after conducting a public hearing on this matter, defer action until the February BZA meeting. No public hearing would be required at that meeting if we conduct the public hearing today as advertised. But and we think the changes aren't substantial enough to warrant another public hearing. However, there just hasn't been adequate time for staff to review the revised plans, and therefore we feel unprepared to to offer you guidance on the revised plan. The revised plan is what is before you. So we would ask, if it pleases the board, for you to conduct the public hearing and then vote to defer action until our February regular meeting. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
What's a type E buffer?
Type E buffer is a 20-foot wide buffer. It's typically what we would require between single-family residential uses and industrial uses. So it's our most densely planted, widest. So, for example, a Type A, which is at it's the smallest buffer that we require, is a 10-foot wide buffer. The Type E is double that at 20 feet wide and would have the greatest volume of evergreen trees and shrubs in it.
Plus, it would have a privacy fence on the south and west sides, or I guess it is.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
So does the applicant have anybody here that would like to? Clyde, come on up.
Thank you, Chairman Halliburton, PZM members, staff. My name is Clyde Rounder, Holston Steel Engineering, and I'm here representing Mr. Chris Slavin with the Enterprise Organization, and also Preston Quirk, the architect, is here represented as well. And as Matthew mentioned, the primary goal with this process is to make sure that we're respecting the adjacent neighbors. And as has been mentioned, on both the western side and the southern side, the Type E buffer is provided. Just from a detail standpoint, that's typically 2 rows of evergreen trees and then 2 rows of evergreen shrubs. So it is a very dense, it's designed to basically make a solid screen. And then we added the 6-foot fence, as Matthew mentioned, so that just provides a physical barrier. So as those trees grow, there are any gaps in those trees, that fence would take care of that kind of situation. Also wanted to bring to your attention that the distance is pretty important. And one of the reasons the site plan was moving around so much is we had 2 different elements that were concerns. One is on the drawing, there's a wash bay building. Our original submittal had that wash bay building kind of directly behind the main building, but it was oriented in such a way that the wash doors, the actual operable doors, were facing the public right-of-way, and that wasn't the best scenario. We were originally under the impression that we could screen that and buffer that, but after getting involved with Enterprise, they really wanted to try to do the best to make sure that the planning staff, as well as everyone else involved, was happy with the plan. So we took that wash bay building, and we originally adjusted it to basically the lower southern portion on the left-hand side to kind of get it behind the building, but there is even a chance from Franklin Road that you'd still be able to see all the way to the back of the development and see those doors. So after working with Matthew, we shifted it over to the right-hand side, and that put it as far away from the adjacent neighbors as possible. So that was one of the major adjustments that basically modified the site plan substantially. The second one is we had the dumpster on the very rear portion of the property, and then after review, we moved the dumpster we moved it up a few bays so it's no longer against the property line. And all that's to respect just any kind of activity on property with the adjacent neighbors. So those are the things that kind of catalyzed some of the changes. The corporate enterprise got involved, and we were involved, so there's a lot of moving parts trying to solidify the plan. As far as the overall, we met the criteria that we feel like are necessary for a car lot to be on this particular piece of property, and we're available for any questions you may have specifically about the design. We also are interested to hear what the neighbors may say and see if we can respond to that as well. But if you have any questions for me, I'm available. Bill Huddleston's also here from the engineering side, and as I mentioned, the architect's here, Preston.
Clyde, can you talk to us a little bit about the car hauler coming in and out of here? I see on the site plan where I guess it's supposed to park, and so is there enough space there for it to be able to unload?
Yeah, I believe I think it's 150 by 25. We meet the criteria for the unloading zone, Ken. That was one of our issues as well. Is that an Amber Alert or a Storm Alert?
Yeah.
Amber. When corporate did the revision, they kind of put that unloading zone kind of in a traffic lane, and our understanding of that criteria is that any unloading has to not impede any of the normal traffic on site. So by taking it down to where we put it, that's basically, we had the right dimensions for it, and it's kind of out of the way, so we feel like that's appropriate. But for clarification, Enterprise really doesn't run any car haulers.
Okay.
That's not even really a part of their business model at all. They don't ship their product that way. A lot of their products brought to them, driven by, and at the most, Chris, would be what, maybe a flatbed or anything like that. Yeah, it's not the operation that we're so concerned about with trucks unloading in the street. So we accommodated the requirement, but that's really not a standard that they even have that they use.
So Matthew, based upon that comment, though, if we, I always get confused on this, if we were to approve the special use permit, it is only for this applicant, correct? It can't be used for someone else that might purchase this property from Enterprise?
It runs with the property.
So not the owner?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and Ken, with that, I think it meets all the criteria for a car lot. That's why
Right.
we have that in there, even though it's not a part of their business model. It is a requirement based on the ordinance.
And Chairman Halliburton, my contention simply is, I can't say whether I feel, what I do feel comfortable and what I don't feel comfortable with. There were moving parts to this. We received a revised plan in 2 hours ago. I consulted a little bit with Mr. Roundtree at the front counter yesterday. Received a plan from him at 5:15 yesterday afternoon, which I responded to. Really, that was after business hours yesterday. That was by email. And then today, I received a revised plan addressing some comments at 11 a.m. this morning. And it's just simply not reasonable to expect staff to be able to fully vet a plan with that little amount of time, considering the other things that we have on our plates as well.
Okay. Any other questions for Clyde while he's up here?
So procedurally, then, it would be appropriate for us to just take a public hearing for those who have taken the time to be here today. And really, we would then defer, we wouldn't even need to have a discussion as to the matter unless we feel so moved that we could defer the discussion of this and the approval of this until next month when you can review it with us again.
I think it would be perfectly appropriate if you had feedback based upon what the neighbors might have to say, or if you observe some things on the plan or about their application that you would like for them to address before the next meeting. I think that would be perfectly appropriate.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. And if after review, if a public hearing would be necessitated according to staff, if there was something that you felt would be appropriate for the public to be notified of, or if you would send out notification again for another public hearing?
If we felt that the application had changed substantially, that another public hearing was warranted, we would certainly do that. Based upon the plans that have been submitted, I don't think that would be the case. It's just a matter of having adequate time to review a plan before we come to a meeting, a televised meeting on TV where we're making decisions about things.
And if anyone who's here today would want to come back, they would be welcome to come back to hear any further discussion as to this, but there would not be an invitation for a public hearing or any further comments from the public.
Yes, ma'am. It would be a public meeting, but not a public hearing. So people could attend and listen. Certainly would be televised again, so they could listen on TV, but it would not be another public hearing.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments for staff or Clyde before we open up the public hearing?
Well, you may not be able to answer this, maybe you can. What revisions were done within the past day that they didn't have prior to this meeting?
Yeah, the catalyst for all the changes from what you originally were submitted was the wash bay building and the orientation. After working with Matthew and Marina and Jafar, it was determined that the wash bay could stay in its current location, just we'd have to provide an accentuated island and put more landscaping along the eastern side. But after corporate saw that concern, they saw the opportunity to go ahead and move that wash bay building back. That wasn't really a problem with any kind of programming on site, and it allowed them to put parking adjacent to the building on the rear of the building. Where the wash bay was originally located, there was no parking on the rear of the building. So that's the biggest change, is where the wash building is located. And then the second change that was primary is that dumpster's literally moved 3 times in the last week. And so the final location where it's now, that's where Matthew hadn't really even seen where that location is. We feel like it's away from the property line enough where it's still it's not in the way of any sort of circulation around the building. So those are the primary things. And then the corporate sent us a plan, which is really interesting because they had it very detailed as far as all the parking. It was color coded. I sent that plan to Matthew, and it was like looking at a matrix cube. I mean, had all these, literally there was probably 10 different colors and 10 different designations of different types of parking. So he asked us to simplify the plan just to go, and that's what we did. So it's primarily taking some of those. The only thing that was kind of a concern, I talked to Mr. Slavin about it, he's the representative for Enterprise, is that I guess the Enterprise here has queuing lanes currently, the development, and we had queuing lanes. Corporate asked us to do queuing lanes on this plan, and Matthew wasn't comfortable with that. So that was the biggest thing that we were hoping for that we were not able to get accomplished on this particular plan. But primarily the main staff concerns, I think, were making sure the relationships of all that pieces were as far away from the property lines as possible. That's why the wash bay went to where it went to, and that's why the dumpster was moved. But those are the primary. Parking was shifted as a result of those 2 decisions. Parking allocations just changed all around the site. Primarily the front stayed unchanged, but most of the difference is on the rear portion of the development.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, so for folks who haven't been to a public hearing, whether it be Planning Commission, City Council, or Board of Zoning Appeals, just a few comments. We'd ask that you would limit your comments to 3 minutes each person. We would ask that you address any questions that you have directly to the board, and then we will take note of those questions and we'll ask either the applicant or staff to respond to those questions if we are not in ability to do so. And with that, I will open up the public hearing for anyone who would like to speak for or against this application. And if you would, state your name and address as when you come to the podium.
Joseph Plummer, 304 Franklin Heights Drive. My home is up the road about a half a mile from this project, and we have lived there going on 29 years. The city and the state has done an excellent job developing that area of Highway 96, and I believe it's the nicest part of the city. Excellent setbacks, plenty of greenery, parking, and many small businesses that are useful. I was so excited when the Hardee's came in, and then the Burger King, and the Just Love Coffee, and the dental care, et cetera, et cetera. I have to write down or I'd forget, I'm too old. When I read the public notice in the paper, my first private thought was, this has to be a Ponzi scheme. A car lot there? That's some high dollar real estate right there. And I always wondered what useful business would go in there just seconds from my home. Or perhaps it will be a land lease deal. Should the car lot fail, then we will be stuck with all the ugly that's left behind, and we have plenty of that around the city. Next to the proposed car lot, a modern, was it Speedway or 7, whatever they're building, it's near completion. But what the heck is that monster 2-story ugly structure next to Speedway that's nearing completion? Here we go again. The city has relaxed the setback a little and not much parking, built a structure that just doesn't fit in with the surrounding architecture. And I just don't understand why the city just cannot stick to its original game plans. I oppose this car lot there that backs up into our neighborhood. And let's stick with our game plans and make this city beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Plummer.
Hello, my name is Marcella Richardson. I'm the executor of the estate of Lois Jean Richardson, 3088 Old Fort Parkway, Franklin Road, same street. I moved there when I was 5 years old, and the house is 60 years old now. It was 1960 it was built. It was zoned, of course it was zoned, it was the country then, but now it's residential. And we just got a notice of this last week in the mail that that there was going to be an enterprise car company there. So I would first off like to please employ you all not to do this without a little bit more notice, and at least letting the people that see this, that live there, that are going to be affected about this every day, let them have some input into it, because this has come as a surprise to both my sister and myself. And we haven't even had a time to have a response, actually. You know, I had to take off work just to come here today to just address this, sir. And we just, one stamp and that's it. And I would like to add that we are the only property from I-24 on down to Pascal Drive that is still zoned residential on Franklin Road. And I'm not trying to protect that. I know my dad used to have a saying, that's progress, and it's going to come out this way. We know that, we accept that. That was a 2-lane little bitty road. It didn't even have a stripe down it when my dad bought that property. I know things have changed, but I would like to be appraised of this, because this is going to have either maybe a positive, but it could certainly have a devastating impact on our home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. My name is Alan Holyfield. I'm at 115 Franklin Heights Drive, which will be right adjacent next door to the west side of the property that's in question. I have several questions and concerns. My first one is the hours of construction. I know when they built the racetrack, because it's right in my backyard, one property over, I can see them. They were working late into the night. I mean, they were hauling rock and dirt in there, dirt to start with. I don't know how many hundreds of truckloads. And they were at 11, 12 o'clock at night working. And that's one of my big concerns. I know it's coming. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with Enterprise being there. I don't have a problem. I think they're going to be good neighbors. I'm trying to be a good neighbor myself. And but I'm just concerned about the impact of what it's going to be on my family. And so one is the hours of construction. How long will it take? Are they going to start at 7? Are they going to quit at 7 or 6 or 5 or whatever time? We're old, we go to bed early, and that was the first one. I'd like to know a proposed start and finish date. When will it be completed? I know things happen. I'm okay with progress. I'm okay with it. I know the Type E buffer. I appreciate the privacy fence. I appreciate the Type E buffer would be the 2 or 3 rows. I asked about a berm, because there is an option. There's option 1, 2, and 3 on the Type E buffers. And one of them is a 3-foot berm, which would be a raised bed, and then the 6-foot trees or privacy fence. I would think that would be tremendous help. So now you're starting off with 9 or 10 feet. And that's going to block off a lot of the light, because I'm concerned with the light in the parking lot. Because I question those, you know, it's going to be like lit up like daylight, which I'm okay with that. And they have the new high-tech lights that shine down. But if they were shining on a parking lot, that's fine. But they're going to be shining on cars. And the reflecting light off those cars is going to be right back up. It's going to light up the neighborhood. You know, that's my question with the berm. I questioned Mr. Ware about the berm, and he said that they weren't going to install a berm because of
Well, I said it might be some issues with the drainage. I didn't know.
drainage, yeah. That was the word I was thinking. You know, so that would create a dam, which I think would be better if the water stays on that side of the property than it coming on my side of the property. And that's another question on my list. I appreciate the privacy fence and the trees, and I question the berm. It would be nice. Will the buffer be installed before construction? That would be nice, to block off some of the construction. Because I don't know if you've ever heard a dump truck dump, but you know, it goes ka-ting, ka-ting, the back of the truck. Like I heard that enough at racetrack. And, but anyway, my next point is the elevation and the runoff and the drainage. They built up racetrack. The property, I didn't go out and measure, I should have. I'm guessing 3 or 4 feet. You know, an elevation difference between the racetrack where it's being built and the field where they're going to put the enterprise. Are they going to build it up 3 or 4 feet with shot rock and dirt and stuff? Then that's going to create a drainage issue towards my property. I understand there's going to be a stormwater management pond, correct?
We'll address all these questions at the end, so.
Okay.
But
But I'm concerned when that pond fills up, where does the water go? Downhill. So that was my concerns. You've already answered my wash bay question with the doors, I think. I think I understand how you moved them. And hours of operation. How are they? I think Mr. Ware told me there were 7 to 7, but I wanted to get that on record to make sure of the hours of operation.
okay.
That's my concerns today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holstead. Good questions. Anyone else would like to speak for or against this application? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Jafar, do you want to address some of these questions, or Matthew, or we'll start?
I can speak to the light. I had spoke to Mr. Holyfield about the light, and I told him that the light would shine no more than a half-foot candle across the property line. Now, whether it bounces off the cars and it disturbs residential areas, I couldn't speak to that. So that's why I told Mr. Holyfield about the light issue. Okay. As far as the hours of construction, start and finish date, I couldn't answer those questions for Mr. Holyfield. I didn't know the answers at the time. I couldn't contact the enterprise to get the answers in a timely fashion.
I would mention that the hours of construction, we do have standards depending on or hours of construction depending on the season. So we would, so if anybody, and I don't have those on me, I think it just depends on if it's spring or summer or fall or winter, but any kind of violation of those prescribed hours of construction can be called in to the city, and we'll pass that along to the appropriate people to enforce those hours of construction.
So I'm just going through the questions that I heard. Mr. Plummer asked about, had setbacks been changed, not specific to this property, but setbacks been changed on 96. I wouldn't think that would be the case, but I'd rather ask staff that question.
No, the commercial highway setback, the standard setback is 42 feet. Now, some developments may choose to have their building back further back than 42 feet, but it's up to their individual site design. The new building that's under construction that he referenced is part of it's where the old Town and Country Apartments used to be. It's, both of those buildings will be demolished. I think one's already been demolished. It's a 3-phase development. The first phase, closest to Old Fort Parkway, has retail on the bottom and I think either 8 or 10 apartments on the second story. And then south of that will be an assisted living building. And then south of that will be a senior living, like senior apartments building. So it's a very difficult piece of property to develop just because it's so long and so narrow. But development with that is moving forward. That one, the building on that one may be pulled closer towards Old Fort Parkway than the other buildings in the area. I know certainly the buildings where like Jersey Mike's is and the old Blue Cactus, those were pulled all the way back to the rear of the property with all of the parking in front, which is, kind of more of a model of development that we saw, in the early 2000s, mid 2000s and earlier. So the development that's under construction right now is a little bit more modern, a little bit more, just a different design than that very suburban design that we saw in the traditional strip centers. Some of the other questions, Ms. Richardson mentioned about notice. We followed all of our standard notification protocol for this public hearing. We send out the notices in the mail 2 Fridays before the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting, which by the time people get the notice, it leaves roughly 9 or 10 days prior to the meeting for them to research the request, call us, and learn about the request, or just simply come to the public hearing. We also put a notice in the Murfreesboro Post. We put a notice on our website, and we put signs on the property as well. So we followed all of our standard notification protocols with this, like we do with any other Board of Zoning Appeals application. With regards to the issues that Mr. Holefield brought up that Mr. Ware hasn't addressed already, the Type E buffer, certainly it would be at the board's discretion to increase any elements of the buffering plan, the buffering and screening plan that the board deems needed to mitigate any negative impacts on the adjacent neighborhood. So if that meant adding a berm to the proposed buffer, that's certainly within the board's purview to condition approval on that. The timing of the buffer installation, the buffer is required to be installed prior to the certificate of occupancy being issued. So that would not be installed prior to construction. And really the reason for that is because if you install plant materials, if you install a buffer, you spent a lot of money putting in a landscape package only to have construction occur directly around the base of it, perhaps killing the plants, disturbing them somehow. And so it's really most prudent to install those after construction is complete so that their ability to survive and thrive is enhanced. As far as drainage, there is a stormwater management pond that is proposed, and our engineers on staff, they review it to make sure the rate of discharge post-construction is no greater than the rate of discharge pre-construction. The specifics of the drainage plan, I would have to defer to Mr. Huddleston on that and how they propose to drain the site. The hours of operation they have included in their application would be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And as a part of their application, that is something that we could hold them to. So if they began to operate to 8 or 9 o'clock, then we could enforce that as a part of their special use permit application. Likewise, if they wanted to request to be able to operate longer, they could make a request to the Board of Zoning Appeals to amend their special use permit to increase their hours of operation. that would require another public hearing and a separate application. So if they're approved, the maximum hours of operation would be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And I think I hit everything that I had written down.
There was one question that you're not going to be able to answer, but the applicant might, is the start and finish date?
I'm Preston Quirk, architect. What we're looking at, assuming site plan approval moves the way we like, would be probably a June start and about an 8-month construction period.
Okay. Thank you. That seems to have addressed the questions that I had. Does the board have any other questions or comments?
I don't recall us having limited hours unless we include that as an additional qualifier in our approval. Is that something that because they've applied to or used in their application as 7 to 7 that it would automatically, or would we need to specify that in our motion?
In my opinion, it would be a part of their application just as it is right now.
Okay.
But certainly as a belts and suspenders approach.
I'm not asking to do that. I just wanted to make
No,
sure.
I think it would not have any negative impact to codify that, if you will, in the form of a condition of approval, should the board wish to approve this today or at next month's meeting.
And I have a question about the type E buffer. Is the berm and the trees with the 2 rows of evergreen and then the 2 rows of trees, is that the most you can do for a type E buffer, or are there other options to provide even more buffer?
So there are several different cross sections that can be considered a type E buffer. One is just the standard plantings within that 20 feet. Another is to substitute a fence for some of the required plantings, and another is to include a berm in lieu of some of the required plantings. What I have specifically asked them to do is that the privacy fence be in addition to a type E buffer, so that we're not eliminating any of the plantings, we're adding the fence to the number of plantings that would be there already. The berm, so it's completely within your purview to say that we want, you could either use the cross-section in the zoning ordinance that has the berm substitute for some of the required plantings, or you could say, I want the required number of plantings in addition to a 3-foot berm or whatever height berm. So it's really, you have a lot of latitude with a special use permit to require what you feel is necessary to properly mitigate any negative impacts on the adjacent residential uses.
Could somebody at the city look at, since we have extra month this time around, look at any impact a berm would cause to drainage?
Certainly.
Could we just have that in the next month's report so that we know? Because I definitely wouldn't want to make that requirement for site and then cause an impact. I know that drainage is a problem when it comes to being close to commercial property.
Also, the elevation as it affects those residences, I guess to both sides actually, but I was thinking more in the rear, but.
We can certainly do that.
And I had a question about the lighting. I don't know how far they are into the game on that part of it, as far as the type that illuminates more like I think that's been installed out at Siegel Park and also at Adams Tennis Center. Is that something that they've already discussed? Because it does seem to mitigate that lighting to adjacent properties.
I mean, all I can say on that is we have not done a photometric plan yet, but I mean, we will comply with the city requirements, which I think someone said is a 1/2-foot candle maximum at property lines. So.
And we do require the lighting fixtures to be oriented primarily down with a maximum angle oriented out. So, but once again, if there are any conditions that you feel would be necessary regarding lighting, That's certainly within your authority.
All right, any other questions for the applicant or for staff before we have a motion? I think the privy of the staff was to try to defer this, but I guess that's up to the board.
I would ask just for your feedback on one thing, and giving the plan just a cursory glance, I do notice that the dumpster is still kind of on the side of the property adjacent to the neighborhood to the west. It's been pulled off, but the original iteration of this plan had the dumpster directly behind the building, like directly adjacent to and behind the building, which I thought was a good location. I don't know why exactly it's been pulled away from the building. My preference would be to get as much separation as possible from the adjacent residential lots, but also not have it right up on the new public right-of-way, but to kind of balance that out. And I think there's still some room for improvement in pulling that further off of the western property line. So any feedback that you have on that would be welcome.
I mean, I would be in agreement with you that anytime you can get the dumpster away from any adjacent neighbors would be the best thing, not seeing the first iteration in front of us, knowing where that might be, and then who knows whether that was an issue of getting to it, you know what I'm trying to say?
Certainly.
But I think they probably heard you, so. All right, again, if no other questions, do we have a motion?
I'll move to defer to next month for further review.
We have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of a deferral, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That has been deferred. So just for the folks that spoke, as Ms. King has already mentioned, at this point, there will not be another public hearing. However, you are more than welcome to come back to what is our next February?
It's on February the 26th
Yeah.
here at 1 p.m.
And so we will have that. This will be on the agenda. Well, it should be on the agenda for February 26th. So you're more than welcome to come back and listen as we discuss the application further at that point in time. 1 p.m. With that, do we have any other staff reports or other business to consider?
No, sir.
If none, we are adjourned.